Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome back to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI and our special continued coverage and analysis and look at Israel's ongoing operation against Iran and with more specifically against Iran's nuclear program. And I'm joined today by two of my fellow JPPI colleagues, Professor Gil Troy and Shmuel Rosner. And guys, I mean, you know, this has been going on already since Friday morning. So already Friday, Saturday.
A six-day war already.
Already a 6-day war. And I think it was someone at our staff meeting yesterday. Was it you, Shmuel, or someone else who joked that Trump's going to make it the 7-day war? Bibi's going to make it the 7-day war because they're going to want to have a distinction between the first 6-day war and this war. But in all seriousness, for a moment, things look like they're going well, but we also know that Israel does tend to get stuck in moments when things go well and not knowing exactly where's that exit ramp that it's supposed to go off and end this. So, I mean, I'll start with you, Shmuel. How do you see where we're headed? Because with the success that we've had, and there's no doubt some great success, the aerial superiority, the degrading of the ballistic missiles, the elimination and decapitation of IRGC military top nuclear scientists, the destruction of at least some of those key nuclear facilities, but not all. But at some point, we have to call it quits, no?
Well, I'll give you the worst scenario case, okay? We have this huge tactical success, and then we stop, and then 2 weeks later, Iran announces that it is about to conduct a nuclear test in the desert. Okay, so all the tactical success doesn't worth much if we end up having this strategic failure. Best case scenario, 2 weeks from now, there is a new regime in Iran, a friendly, tolerant regime, and the whole nuclear issue becomes mute because Iran no longer seeks to have a nuclear weapon or to eliminate Israel. Between these two poles, we have to find the balance. We have to find something that is realistic, feasible, and achievable. I think, again, a realistic, good scenario would be for Israel to somehow be able to deal with all the nuclear facilities of Iran, maybe possibly with the assistance of a U.S. involvement. And then if you eliminate all these facilities, you get a period of time in which you can be relatively calm. There's not going to be a militarily nuclear capability at the hands of Iran. And then you can go into round of negotiations, talk about the future, etc. I think this is what Israel is aiming for, but this depends to some extent, at least, on the willingness of the U.S. president, or President Trump's willingness to participate in this effort, because without the U.S. eliminating all these facilities is quite complicated.
So before we talk about what Israel can do and cannot do, and I tend to think, by the way, and I could be 100% wrong, that Israel went into this. Let's put it this way. If the Israeli plan was, let's go into this, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, but number 5 of the plan is we'll force Trump to get involved. I mean, sorry, I don't know how smart that is, right? That's a wishful thinking, and you never know, and unless it's all coordinated. But to think that the inertia of this is just going to bring him to get involved, I don't know that that's necessarily a great strategy. So I want to think, and from what I do here, is that at least Fordo, which is like kind of the big target that Israel can't take out on its own, which has some validity, there must be some thinking from an operational, tactical perspective. But Gil, I do want to ask you, as someone who was closely follows U.S. politics and has written a number of biographies about U.S. presidents, is to look at Donald Trump over the last definitely 48 hours, if not 72 hours. It seems that he didn't want Israel to do this. Israel did it, went ahead. He watched and saw how Friday was a great success. took a major victory lap. I loved watching all the interviews and the phone calls he made to all these journalists, and what we've achieved. And now these tweets yesterday: we have air superiority. We, all this. Who are the we? I didn't see him flying in one of the F-35s or F-15s, but if that's what it takes, let's give it to him. Where do you think he is? And is there a way to maybe predict what he might do? And let me just say, we're recording. It's now 2:17 on Wednesday, June 18th in the afternoon. So whatever answer you give is only
Israel
good.
time.
Israel time is only good for right now.
So we all know that anybody who tries to predict the actions of the most mercurial president in American history is on a fool's errand. But I think you said two things that are incredibly important. First of all, let's go back to the first 8 hours of the operation, which is very important for me to emphasize that it wasn't a preemptive strike, because Iran threw 500 ballistic missiles and rockets at us on 2 critical days in the last year and a half, which is a justified war. And at first, the United States was a little bit quiet, and even Marco Rubio, who's a good friend of Israel, was kind of wary. And I think success breeds success. And as soon as Donald Trump saw that Israel had done something mind-blowing and historic, that made a huge change. And we've seen that since then, he's done something which he hadn't been willing to do until this point, which is take on Tucker Carlson and take on some of the MAGA neo-isolationists. Some people are calling them restrainers, but I think it's important to call them out as isolationists because they're living in this delusional world of the 1930s and of 1915, that when things are happening outside the United States of America, you can simply burrow down and assume that it's not going to affect you. And so I think that there are really fascinating tensions within the MAGA coalition. And right now, you're right. I mean, those tweets. And by the way, I do want to be a little kinder to Trump and say, God bless America. This has been one of my themes for the last year and a half, which is both under Joe Biden and under Donald Trump, while there have been some tensions, the amount of American munitions, the amount of American support, the amount of American diplomatic muscle going behind Israel has been extraordinary. And so if he takes the victory lap, A, it's good for us, and B, there's a lot of truth to it too.
So, there is the Trump question, and no one really knows yet what's going to happen. And I think that without a doubt, from an operational standpoint, an American military intervention here, it can take care of business quite quickly, right? So if like Fordo's, I would say probably Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is presenting or has already presented the different options and levels. You could just take out Fordo. You need 1 or 2 B-2 bombers and a couple of those MOBs, the GBU 57s, the real big massive ordnance penetrators that can take out and penetrate the Fordo facility. Probably another option that's on the table is more of the nuclear installations. So redo Natanz, redo Isfahan, make sure that what Israel attacked is really obliterated. And option 3 is probably go after the general military targets as well, right? So take out the Navy, take out more of the Air Force, take out more of the land forces, and try to prevent them from being able to wreak havoc in the Persian Gulf or attack the Saudis or the Emiratis or any of these other people. And Trump, if he does do any of that, will decide what's the scale and what he does. But absent that, Shmuel, what can Israel, because if I think of past instances of nuclear attacks, OC Iraq in 81, Al-Kibar in Syria in 2007. They were one-offs. You bombed a building, a reactor, you flew home, you called it a day, you hoped there wasn't going to be retaliation, okay? Here, this is already something much different. So when does Israel say I'm done? What is that point?
I'm not sure there is such point, and that's one of the difficulties that we are having. I think that Israel decided to reshuffle the cards because it saw no other choice. You mentioned earlier that if Israel's plan was to make Donald Trump join in, that's not a good plan. And I tend to agree with you, unless it's the only plan available for Israel, short of letting Iran having a nuclear weapon. You might reach a point in which you say, well, I have to make a bet here because there's no better plan for me to pursue other than just saying that I surrender and Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon. So maybe Israel reached this point in which it said, we are going to do as much as we can in the hope that the other countries in the world are going to understand the necessity of joining in, participating. I'm looking not just at Donald Trump, I'm looking at the comments made by the Chancellor of Germany, who suddenly said, well, Israel is doing the dirty work of the whole world. It's not as if other countries in the world don't understand that there is a tension between their declared policy, no nuclear Iran, and their actual actions, which was, dragging your feet, doing nothing, going into another round of negotiations. At some point, Israel did what it did in order to make all countries understand that this tension must be resolved somehow. Either you say you really don't want Iran to have nuclear weapon. In such case, you must join in and let us finish the job. Or it's all a facade, and what you really mean by no nuclear Iran is, well, we are just going to do what we did in North Korea, which means pass the time until it's no longer possible to prevent it from having nuclear weapon. So Israel forced the world into this dilemma, and now the burden is in some way on them. You ask, you ask, what is Israel going to do if they don't join in? The answer might be an ongoing, very long war, because now you really can't let Iran regain its
And rebuild.
rebuild its military, regain its ability to have an anti-air missiles. You'll have to keep fighting and keep attacking in order to keep Iran down, which can lead to month-long, years-long type of war, which will not be good neither for Iran nor for Israel, nor, I think, for the stability of the world. And that's why I think President Trump is seriously considering the tendency of the United States to join in, because either they help us finish the job, or we are going to look into something that can drag on for many months and years, which will not be good for the stability of this region.
No, and that's a very interesting point, is that helping us helps themselves, right? And it's a way of potentially cutting this whole thing short. Gil, one of the other issues that's definitely come up, and I kind of feel like I see this creeping in, is this fantasy or romanticization, if that's the word, with regime change. You're starting to hear a lot of Israelis talking about it. By the way, I mean, another thing that just I find upsetting and a little disturbing is, like, Israelis. I heard Yoav Gallant on CNN say that America has an obligation to get involved in this war. I mean, with all due respect to Yoav Gallant, America does not have an obligation to get involved in this war. But besides for maybe misreading America on that, this idea of regime change, historically speaking, doesn't always play out as well as people like to think. And I understand why we're maybe a little tempted now, because we're in there and we're seeing success and we're feeling that, wow, just a little more and we could bring down the Ayatollah, and just a little more and we could lead the people to the uprising. But at the end of the day, as amazing as it is to be able to fly to a country 2,000 kilometers away of 70 million people and take out their air defense systems, that's one thing. To go to that same country and try to engineer and manipulate the creation of an alternative government is a whole other thing. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Theodore Roosevelt said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." And unfortunately, that's something that too many Israelis, from the left and from the right, don't know how to do.
They reverse it.
Right. Although we carry big sticks too. I have to give our army credit on that one. But there is a kind of bravado that is not helpful. We saw it at the beginning of the October 7th war about Gaza, and we've seen how some of these phrases literally come back to bite us and to hurt our soldiers when they want to travel to Europe or to other countries. And so the most important thing for our Israeli leaders is restraint in rhetoric. That's number one. Number two, I think you can make an argument to the United States of America that we're not talking about a forever war. We're talking about what you mentioned before, like at Osirak in 2007 with Syria, specific pinpoint operations. There are in history operations which worked. To start going into regime change is to just open up a Pandora's box. Everybody's an expert, right? And everybody wants to press the button and have a video game or remote control regime change. And I get it, because especially those of us of a certain generation watched the Soviet Union, which was the most terrifying, evil force after the Nazis, just disappear overnight. Now, of course, it was a little more complicated than that, but it went remarkably smoothly. And then we saw all these other Eastern European dominoes fall. And so everybody of that generation is expecting that to happen. Let's remember that this is the Middle East. Let's remember that Iran, while it's mostly Persian, also has all kinds of other warring tribes and ethnic groups, and who knows what could happen. But most of all, let's remember that there is a long history of outside powers trying to dictate exactly the scenario that they imagined and not succeeding. And it's funny, Shmuel,
there's the famous scenario. There's the famous instance in the 1950s when the Americans tried to overthrow them, right, and run a coup.
Yeah, and to this day, you still hear leftists being pro-Mullah because of some mistakes that the CIA made in the 1950s, which is also, not justified, but fascinating. When Shmuel talked about the worst case scenario, to me, the parallel worst case scenario is indeed the sort of long war of attrition, especially because the Iranians do have the ability to keep us in economic lockdown, to put our kids in trauma, to have killed so far 24 people. And so this is not a video game. And the stakes are very high. So I get the fantasy that Donald Trump comes in and solves the problem. I also say, it's possible that there's a little bit of disinformation, like there was disinformation last week, and maybe the Americans and Israelis are more in sync than we know. Or maybe also Tzahal has the IDF has a whole other set of battle plans for dealing with Fordo, which isn't about the B-2s and the American scenario. In other words, the degree to which all of us know exactly what needs to be done gets my historian's spider sense tingling and saying, oh, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe they're working on us. And I hope they are. It's not a prediction, but it's just a suspicion.
I mean, by the way, the proof is in the fact of what just happened the last couple of weeks. Everyone was sure.
You don't need to be a historian. Just look a week back.
Everyone was sure that there's.
That's a historian these days because everybody lives in the moment.
Yeah, but that there's division, that Trump's against us, that he doesn't like Bibi, that, Bibi's clout in Washington has fallen. I mean, again, we know so little of really what's happening behind the scenes. But I kind of do want to. It's a good shifting point because I wanted to bring it to Bibi a bit. Politically speaking, Shmuel, last week looked like where the government's about to fall. The Haredim were threatening there was going to be a no confidence vote. In the end, it didn't pass. It seemed as if elections are around the corner because of the IDF draft law, and suddenly the Haredim agreed to a compromise that kind of shelved for the time being the issues over the draft law. And now we know maybe why. I'm guessing that this had something to do with it in a way of trying to convince them there are bigger issues that are on the agenda. But what does this do for Netanyahu politically, right? People have long been eulogizing this man's political career, and he has long proven them all wrong. So how do you see this now factoring into it all?
Well, my answer might be a disappointment. I think it's too early to know. You can go the old Bibi route and say, well, he's winning again. He's back on the horse. After the war is over, if he's really successful, he can call for a new election, win a quick round of new election, and be the prime minister of Israel for the next 10 years. Or you can say, well, maybe he reached his Churchillian moment, and like Churchill, he'll have to walk out winning. He'll win the war and lose the next election because Israel will now be able to say, we are done with our enemies. Bibi fulfilled his, life's
Historical
calling.
role. Right.
Yeah, life's calling. And now we can look inward and talk about, unifying the country, talking about civilian matters and other things that other people might do better than Netanyahu. So it can go both ways. Let me remind you that 5 years ago, after the pandemic, in which Netanyahu was exceptionally, he was exceptional compared to most other leaders in the world. Israel was exceptional. His leadership during the pandemic was something that, worthy of great praise. And yet, after the pandemic, he lost an election. People did not, well, they might have given him the credit for doing what needs to be done during the pandemic, but on Bibi, views are so polarized today that you can make the case that even if Israel wins the war, people are going to say, well, good for him. We praise him for what he did during the war. And yet, we want someone else to lead the country at this point. So, again, we don't yet know if we are winning. We don't yet know what will be the price and the result of this war. After the war is over, we will be able to sit down and make all these political calculations. Right now, Bibi, of course, is riding high. He's leading the country for good and bad. This is his war. He dictated all the terms by which this war was conducted. And other than that, I think we'll have just to wait and see.
And if I can add, let's look at the exquisite timing. The fact that the bombing on Thursday night, early Friday morning, began shortly after the no confidence vote, which basically gives Netanyahu a 6-month window without another no confidence vote. And that means that you can't politicize that move. You can't say he's doing it just because of politics, which has been the critique of him in Gaza. Second, that it came on the 61st day when Donald Trump had given the Iranians 60 days to negotiate. On day 61, boom, it happened. And I think those two things are part of the reason why, to throw in one more number, 90% of the Israeli public in the latest polls are supporting Israel's initiative. And the polls in the United States are really interesting because what I'm reading, and obviously it's very early, is that the polls in America are overwhelmingly in support of Israel over Iran. If you ask, should the United States get involved, it gets to more 50-50. But when you talk about Americans, most Americans' gut saying, right on, we know who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, which has not been clear for a while, it's really important. And so I think the time...
You said earlier that success breeds success. I'd say success is contagious in some way.
Amen.
When Israel is successful, well, look back at the 1967 war, the war that changed the image of Israel in the eyes of the whole world. We can see a repetition of such phenomenon. When Israel is winning, that's helping. That's, winning is better than losing, and you gain the support of the world when you are seen as a successful, thriving, innovative, creative, bold type of country.
But you also have to be concerned. Let's remember what came after 1967 is that 6 years later you had the hubris and the arrogance that led to the falling asleep at the wheel of the Yom Kippur War. I mean,
that's on us. That's on us. We have to make sure that we don't get too cocky because of what we see now in Iran.
And that kind of maybe ties back to what I was talking about before about the regime change, is that we might be some, we have to have humility in what we can, halavai, right? I think everyone wants that oppressive regime.
Regime change is like the Messiah. We can pray for it, but we need to operate as if Messiah is not coming tomorrow, not necessarily.
Right. And beware mission creep. We started with a very specific mission, and I think that's also the appeal to the Americans. Keep it operational rather than warlike. keep it focused on the goal, and then we have a chance of really changing world history. And I think that's the thing, it is very important for our supporters abroad to, first of all, put this in context. Second of all, understand that Israel had every right to do it, given the genocidal threats and given the 500 missiles that I mentioned before, and given the ring of fire that Iran has been trying to surround Israel with. And it's also important for us to say, we right now have our eyes on the prize and we'll keep our focus. And if we keep the focus, we have a chance of really improving the world and once again, throwing out the world's garbage. And indeed, as Shmuel said, doing the world's dirty work.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, and I do totally agree with you, Gil. And I'll add just one other point to the ones you made before about why this is not a political issue. You mentioned the no confidence motion. Every prime minister, every head of the Mossad, every IDF chief of staff has been preparing for this day. And I think that they all viewed Iran and its pursuit of a nuclear weapon in the same way. There's no opposition coalition on this issue. And I said to someone earlier today, if you don't believe that Israel really had the intelligence and really knew what was happening, would Yair Lapid be saying, the head of opposition, that yes, I have a bitter rivalry, a political rivalry with Bibi, but on this issue, I stand completely shoulder to shoulder with him? That has to stand for something in a country that really knows how to politicize everything, and even threats the likes of something with a potential existential characteristic to it. So with that, let me thank you both, Shmuel Rosner and Gil Troy. Thank you for joining me. And to our listeners, we will continue to come back to you with interesting guests, hopefully interesting commentary and analysis as Israel continues to try to eliminate Iran's nuclear program to the greatest degree possible. Thank you very much. Have the rest of a quiet day.